Alito Chimachukma, this is Chief Steve coming at y'all with another episode of True Story. We got a really interesting one for you guys today, but before we get into it, make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're new. Don't forget to hit that notification bell as well, so whenever I drop these bombs, you'll be the first ones to grab them. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Before the United States was formed, before Columbus, before the Pilgrims, a proud and powerful people thrived along the banks of the Mississippi River. Their temples rose from the earth. Their leaders were seen as divine descendants of the sun. Their society was one of the most sophisticated and spiritually rooted civilizations east of the Rockies. They were called the Nachez, but that wasn't their true name. The people known today as the Natchez were part of a far older legacy. Their roots stretch back to the Plaquemine and Coles Creek cultures, civilizations of mound builders, astronomers, priests, and farmers who aligned their lives with the natural and spiritual order. Now, the Coles Creek culture was from 700 to 1200 CE. They were located in the lower Mississippi Valley, which is now modern-day Louisiana and Mississippi, if we're talking state-wise, as you can see on the map. Now, what they did was they built flat-top mounds, and which we'll show later in the presentation. They used these flat-top mounds for temples or elite residences, for their nobles. They had a hierarchy. Now, this is important because it's a transitional culture between the earlier woodland period and the later Mississippian and Plaquemine cultures. Now, the Plaquemine culture was from 1200 to 1700 CE. This was also located in the lower Mississippi Valley. Now, what they did was they built ceremonial mounds. They made pottery and had complex chiefdoms. The connection is that the Plaquemine evolved from the Coles Creek culture. That culture evolved from that past culture. Just like how we do nowadays, our culture is always evolving, always elevating. Nothing really stays the same, but we still find the roots in it. So, not only did it evolve from the Coles Creek, but it also overlapped with the Mississippian culture and trade and structure. But they still maintained their own unique trait within it. Now, the other cultures that you see on the timeline that are listed in gray is the Mississippian culture. That was 800 to 1600 CE. They were in central and southeastern United States. They were known for massive mound complexes, as you know, like Cahokia in Illinois. They're the most known amongst our Aboriginal community. About about the Mississippi. If you haven't heard about the Mississippians, you better ask somebody, and you're in the right place, to learn. So we have them. They were important, of course, because they had the large cities, the strong central leadership, and wide trade networks. A lot of what we know today about our roots come from the Mississippian culture. We also see the Mayan civilization on here. That's from 2000 BCE to 1697 CE. They were located in southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras area. And what they did is they built pyramids. They had a written language, mathematics, astronomy, complex city-states. They're important because they're one of the most advanced and long-lasting civilizations in the Americas. And then we also have the Caddoan culture. That was another staple culture in the United States area. In East Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, that area. If you need to see that on the map, I can show that to you and pause for the cause. So yeah, you're looking at East Texas, that eastern part of Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma. So all of these cultures you can see were around the same area, although in different times, they were all taking place in this general area. I mean, except for, the Mayan, which were a little further down in this area right here. But when you zoom out as a whole, you see this is all Turtle Island. We're all connected. From the tip of the north, all the way down to the south. We all connected. I just like playing with this thing. It's just a little tangent. Gulf of America. You thank Trump for that. Anyway, let's get on back to the presentation. So the Caddoan had similar mound building, pottery, and they also had complex societies. And that's important because sometimes they're considered a subset of the Mississippian tradition, but they're not really talked about as much amongst, our different researchers. So shout out to the Caddoan. And I happen to have Caddoan blood as well. So shout out to the tribe. But they were considered a subset of the Mississippian tradition, but they had their own distinct social and ceremonial practices. And if you didn't notice, or you're not familiar with diagrams and charts, the best way to read this chart is the x-axis, which is right there on the bottom. It's the timeline moving from the early years on the left as far back as 2000 BCE for the Maya, and then to modern times on the right. So it moves that way. And then each horizontal bar shows the span of years a culture was active or at its peak. And so particularly, I highlighted in red, the Coles Creek and the Plaquemine, because they both have something to do with the Nachez, what they know as the Nachez. All right. So let's continue forward. The Plaquemine and Coles Creek cultures are actually the direct ancestors of the Natchez Indians. For example, the Coles Creek people lived in the lower Mississippi Valley from 700 to 1200 CE. They built ceremonial mound centers, organized chiefdoms, and had emerging political complexity, but not quite full kingdoms yet. Their way of life laid the social and architectural groundwork for later cultures. Coles Creek introduced the platform mound system that the Natchez would later continue using. The Plaquemine culture from 1200 to 1700 CE. They were their immediate predecessor. They evolved directly from the Coles Creek. They continued the mound building tradition, but began to show Mississippian style influence, like shell tempered pottery and elite burials. So this would be a general idea as to what those elite burials will look like, along with the pottery and artistry and stuff. So this is just a actual image. If you zoom out a little bit, I was lucky enough to find this image right here. So very interesting. And you see who they have working on these mounds. They got them right there doing business. And then they hire us to build on our own mounds. To basically destroy them. Dig through them. But yeah, this is what a general idea as to what those just that ingenuity would look like. So despite these Mississippian traits, they retained many unique practices, especially around social hierarchy and sacred kinship and kingship. Plaquemine culture transformed into the historic Natchez people that Europeans met in the 1600s and 1700s. So the Nachez, who are the historic descendants, by the time of European contact, the Nachez retained their platform mounds for temples and chief residences, the complex caste system, nobles, honor people, and stinkards, as they would say in the European term. A paramount chief called the Great Sun, who was seen as a semi-divine. Their culture was highly stratified with religious beliefs and social systems that mirrored most of those seen in the Plaquemine era. The Nachez still lived in many of the same mound centers originally built during the Coles Creek and Plaquemine periods. So you see, these were not just native people. They were the copper-colored aborigines of America. Like I said, there's a difference between native and American Indian. There's a difference between somebody who's just native to the land and someone who is an aborigine, who is original to the land. And we, the so-called Black Americans of today, carry their blood, their fire, and their memory. Their land, present-day Mississippi, Louisiana, and Arkansas, their heart, a grand village along the Natchez Bluffs. Before the French ever named them Natchez, they referred to themselves as Theloel or Nashi. These words may have meant noble people or the real people. Their language was unique, a linguistic isolate, unrelated to any other known language. Scholars today still can't link it to any other broader family. And that tells us something. They weren't just another tribe. They were their own nation, their own people, a sovereign identity erased, renamed, and misunderstood. Sound familiar? The Nashi weren't a scattered people. They were not a scattered people. They weren't just living in random villages. They were organized, structured, and deeply spiritual. At the top of their society stood the Great Sun, not just a chief, but a divine being. He was believed to descend from the sun itself. Beneath him were nobles, warriors, craftsmen, and commoners. It was a layered society governed by cosmic law and communal balance. And it was matrilineal, so they followed the matriarch. Lineage and power were passed through the mother. So let that sink in. Power flowed through the women. When the great sun passed away, his death was marked as a cosmic event. Rituals were performed. Sometimes relatives and servants followed him into the afterlife. A tradition deeply spiritual to them and often misunderstood by others. This was not savagery. There's nothing savage about this. This was sacred. These were a people who were in rhythm with their beliefs. Religion wasn't a part of Natchez, or should I say Nachez, life. It was their life. And I wouldn't even necessarily call it religion. It's divine order. It was their life. They aligned themselves with the divine order of the sun, the stars, the earth, and the natural cycles. Their temples stood on mounds, and sacred flames burned in eternal honor of the sun. Priests and spiritual leaders conducted ceremonies during solstices, and equinoxes. Everything they did was in harmony with the heavens. Compare that to the spiritual disconnection many of our communities feel today. We were once fully aligned with the cosmos, fully aware of our place in the natural and divine world. We have to remember. In 1682, French explorer La Salle passed through Natchez territory. The Natchez welcomed trade. The French admired their strength, their wisdom, their way of life, and for a moment there was peace. But peace never lasts long when colonial greed enters the picture. The French demanded more land. They imposed unfair trade, and worse, rumors began to spread. The French intended to enslave the Natchez. And like the warriors they were, the Natchez responded. In 1729, the Natchez launched a coordinated attack. They destroyed Fort Rosalie and killed over 200 French settlers. It was bold, it was calculated, and it was a declaration. We will not be conquered. And here I found something really interesting on the Northwind Picture Archives. This is a picture of the Natchez War on the French settlers in Mississippi, 1729. And that's what it looks like right there. Very interesting, huh? We gonna have a better image of that. I'm gonna bring it up for you. But yeah, this is $199. You can get it. But yeah. So this is an actual picture from the archives. A painting. So, yeah. Natchez War on French settlers, Mississippi, 1729. And here's that better close-up picture for you. There's no mistaking. These are copper-colored people. And they weren't taking no shit either. They will not be conquered. That was their mantra. That's what they was moving with. They weren't just going to go quietly. They weren't going to be taken down without a fight. This is from the Northwind Picture Archives, 1729, Mississippi. But the French struck back with brutality. They allied themselves with the Choctaw, who are the traditional enemies. At that time, they were the traditional enemies of the Nachez. The Choctaw were. Over 2 years, the Nachez were attacked, hunted, and scattered. Survivors were captured. Some were sold into slavery in the Caribbean. Others found refuge with the Creek, the Chickasaw, and the Cherokee. By 1731, the Nachez, as a sovereign nation, had been destroyed. And although the Nachez, as a sovereign nation, were destroyed, their descendants still live on today. Just look in the mirror. A special shout out to one of my subscribers who wanted to know more about the Nachez, about the Natchez people. Sorry it took me so long to get to this video, but I'm glad that I did, and I hope you're still around, and I hope you enjoyed this. Their mounds still rise from the Mississippian soil. Their language, though considered extinct, is still studied by linguists and remembered by their descendants. Their story lives on in us. This was a civilization of sacred fire and divine rulers, of people who resisted colonization with everything they had. A culture that defies the myth that the copper-colored Aboriginal Americans were primitive. They were not primitive. They were rooted. They were advanced. They were spiritual. And we, the so-called Black Americans, we are their echo. The Nachez remind us that American history didn't begin with Columbus or the Pilgrims. It began with civilizations like theirs, like ours, copper-colored Aborigines, the American Indian. We were here. We are still here. And we ain't going nowhere. This is True Story. Tatakista. I cherish you all. And Yokogi. Thank you for watching. We'll see you on the next one.